ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening to you all. One way we describe the Buddhist path out of suffering and the things we have to develop to do that, developing the reflection on the three characteristics of existence, universal characteristics of existence: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self, or the selfless nature of things, phenomena, physical, mental phenomena. This is what we call the path, developing insight into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. They in themselves are just characteristics, universal characteristics that apply to physical and mental phenomena throughout the world, whether it's the internal world, this body and mind, or what's out there, the external world. When we bring our minds to pay attention and observe these three characteristics, or just one of them, because often by observing one, the other two become apparent. This is the way the mind is liberated, freed from suffering. Because when we don't observe them is when suffering arises. When we don't observe the three characteristics of existence, that's the time where our mind gets caught into wanting and craving, clinging and attachment, and this causes suffering. So one of the complaints people keep having at the moment is that the world seems to be just providing one problem after another for us. Our own personal world, or the world out there that we hear about every day, seems to be one thing after another. Pandemic, natural disasters, economic disaster, war, conflict, problems. But when we come to look more closely at the nature of things, we're coming to see, well, that's the nature of the world. There is endless change. Of course, some of it is man-made, coming through human beings' ignorance and unskillful behavior, unskillful conduct. We do cause a lot of trouble and problems for each other. But even without that, the world is in a constant state of change. And because it's in a constant state of change, it's constantly degenerating as well. Whatever we build up and establish, the good things that we get and have, they don't last. But because things are in a state of change and the nature is impermanent, that's also pointing to the deeper truth that ultimately we don't control or own anything. And that's the deepest suffering we have, is this sense of ownership that's constantly being challenged by the three characteristics of existence. Because the sense of ownership is a delusion. As I was saying just now, when we're watching the breath, even just a simple act of watching your breath or putting your attention on the breath, sense of ownership arises as soon as we're not very clear, not very mindful, not reflecting on things. We take ownership of the breath and already that's a problem for us. And we form an opinion and we react to our own breath and we say, my breath. But really breath is just breath, isn't it? It's just air going in and going out. There's a body breathing in, breathing out. But the sense of ownership comes in and we start to suffer with something as simple as breath. So it's not surprising we suffer with this sense of ownership with everything else. So many people have been complaining, they say, we're just getting used to COVID and dealing with COVID and just coming out of that problem, the pandemic, and now we've got other problems coming up. And life seems to be a succession of problems. But it's this sense of ownership and self that is the real cause, isn't it? That we take ownership of every change, everything. And that's where the suffering comes from. We don't want things to change. When things are going well, going our way, we want it to stay like that forever. But it doesn't, because the world is imperfect and it's changing all the time. And it's conditioned. Causes and conditions bring these changes. And they're out of our control. Even when we put a lot of effort into controlling the world as much as we possibly can, it doesn't stay the way we want it for very long. So this is why the Buddha encouraged us to develop right view and develop this path of mindfulness, introspection, looking at the way things are more closely. Because that brings our mind in line with the truth more and more. It actually frees us from suffering. When we can see and accept change for what it is, just the way things are, the mind goes more quiet, doesn't it? We put all our efforts into our life, gaining knowledge and education and skills and trying to keep ourselves healthy and fit and happy in different ways, but it's very difficult to maintain that. It takes a lot of effort, and as we get older, that effort wears us out as well. We get burnt out, worn out. We feel like it's a big struggle just to kind of keep ahead of the world and all of its problems. And as we're getting older, it's getting harder because we get weaker. But when we bring our minds to reflect on the Dhamma, maybe that can help us. The Dhamma is what brings peace, happiness, clarity to our minds. And that's where we can really understand the nature of the world and really free ourselves from this experience of stress, suffering that we all have. Coming in, bringing our thoughts and views in line with the Dhamma doesn't mean to say we bring our mind to a point where we just don't care about anything. It's not that we give up on the world, but we're training ourselves and developing this quality of mindfulness and investigation so that we're not fooled by the world or caught out by it. But it takes practice, it takes training. We need to cultivate these qualities. And one of the qualities we're developing is just the ability to witness or observe the truth, the way things are. And where do you start? There's so much going on in the world, whether it's sort of news about the world around us or what other people are doing, what's happening all around us. It's hard to follow all of that at the same time. So the Buddha encouraged us to start with ourselves first. That much we can know. We can know this body, this mind, as it is in the present moment, we can start to observe that much. Other people's bodies and minds are further away, and there's over 7 billion people in this world, so there's a lot of bodies and minds to follow. If you're going to try and understand the world by following other people, it already seems like quite a lot of work. But this body and mind, right here, right now, that's that much we can know. So the Buddha said, the place of practice is this fathom-long body and mind. 1 fathom, I don't know what that is, 6 foot. So some people are 5 foot, some people are 7 foot. But roughly speaking, this body of between 5 and 7 foot long is our place of learning, our place of study. And wherever we go, we take this body and mind with us. So that doesn't mean to say we can't go anywhere in the world, and that we sort of somehow chain to one place. Doesn't mean that. It just means as we go about our business, develop more awareness of this body and mind, our 5 khandhas, feelings, memories and perceptions, thoughts and intentions, and sense consciousness. This is the place to study, this is the place to observe these 3 characteristics at work. And the more effort we put into that, the more chance we have to understand what is suffering and its nature and how to end it. We understand what its cause is. It's caused by craving, clinging and delusion, ignorance, which we miss all the time because we're not paying attention to this body and mind. And as you meditate, that you notice that, don't you? As you practice mindfulness, you notice all the times when you're not mindful, when your mind slips away into its thoughts and daydreams and views and opinions on things. And when we go about our business in our day, sometimes we're aware, sometimes not. And we notice when we're not aware, then things start to happen. We're on shaky ground when we're not very aware. We make mistakes, we believe our opinions and views on things too much, we identify too much with every little feeling of pleasure and pain, and life starts to become stressful. So if you are feeling lost in this world of change, endless change and problems coming one after another, this is the way to ground yourself in reality. The real world is this body and mind in the present moment, and observing it as it is, observing that it's changing all the time. Your physical body is changing every moment of every day, and just following the breath shows you that. As you breathe in, breathe out, physical changes are taking place. The breath itself is not permanent. You don't always breathe in, you don't always breathe out. You breathe in and then you breathe out and then you breathe in again. Even the breath is teaching us this simple fact. And it's teaching us the unsatisfactory nature of a human body because breath doesn't last. It'd be nice if you could just breathe in once in the morning maybe, and then that would do you for the rest of the day. But it doesn't work like that, does it? You have to breathe in, breathe out. And sometimes we get colds and flu and breathing problems as well. It's an unsatisfactory part of our existence, the fact that we have to rely on breath. And that's just the beginning of it, isn't it? The more you observe your body, you observe how it's aging and getting hot and cold, and we constantly have to feed it and clothe it and look after this body, and we have to keep moving posture every day, every moment of every day. And you can't, even if you're feeling at your laziest and you just want to lie on the sofa watching Netflix, or you want to lie in bed sleeping as much as you can, sooner or later it's too painful to do that. You have to get up. Or if you're really into exercise and you just love running or exercising, you can't do it forever because you get tired and pain. This body is teaching us the Dhamma all the time. It's one of our best teachers. It's teaching us the impermanent nature of physical form, what we call Rupa Dhamma. It's changing all the time. It's a conditioned thing. It's caused by causes and conditions. Like, where does a human body come from? It comes from an egg fertilized by sperm, and then consciousness joins that. It's the Buddha's description of a birth is that at the moment of fertilization, there's a queue of consciousness is ready due to their craving and clinging stored up from past lives, just ready to join the fertilized egg, and a new life is formed. But that's causes and conditions. If there's an egg but no sperm, you can't have a birth, or a sperm but no egg. You have to have that, and then you have to have consciousness, and then an embryo begins. And then that also needs nutrition, it gets from blood, needs oxygen from the air, from mum's breathing and the bloodstream. And it grows and it needs safety and protection. All kinds of different causes and conditions will facilitate the embryo growing, and then eventually it's born with a lot of pain and struggle from mum. And then there's still more causes and conditions to keep it going. It needs food, nutrition, and again, warmth and safety, and then we start educating and bringing up that baby. But it's all dependent on causes and conditions. If we neglect the baby, maybe it just starve to death or get diseased or hurt, because babies are very fragile and we can't neglect them. This is all causes and conditions. And on it goes as you grow up, and you start to experience the mental world of causes and conditions that are subject to change. And this is something to witness, isn't it? As you watch in your mind in meditation, you see how one thought conditions another thought. So we get trains of thought. We get a memory perhaps pops up, and it is a cause for another thought, another memory, and that brings with it different feelings, pleasure and pain, boredom, excitement and interest, pleasure and displeasure, liking, disliking, and on it goes. One thing is a cause for another. And this is the heart of what the Buddha was teaching us, to really look into these three characteristics of existence and how they're appearing and manifesting all the time in this body and in the mind. The way we feel, the way we think, what we do, our views on the world. And sometimes it's good just to sit down and contemplate this, what is really permanent in life. And it's not that you have to believe what the Buddha said. He didn't encourage that. He said investigate the Dhamma. Establish some awareness, pay attention to the truth, and then investigate. And a lot of our practice is just investigating, observing, learning about the truth of things. Is it true that all physical and mental formations are impermanent? Maybe that's just some theory that's totally out of line with the truth. It's just a delusion. You have to investigate it and keep looking. Maybe there is something there after all that we can say is a self, me, the lasting me, the true me, the real me. This is a way we train our mind to observe and investigate the truth, and using the skills of meditation, the mindfulness, the clarity, the clear comprehension, and just training the mind to look more closely at the way things are. As we practice meditation, one of the aspects is just learning to calm the mind, bring up mindfulness, and then develop continuous mindfulness. Because it brings this ability to just pay attention so that we can look and observe, see the way things are. And if you can have more continuous mindfulness, then the mind feels calm, it's more centered, it becomes more equanimous, we say. And with equanimity, we're able to look at things from a place of balance, detachment, without falling into the biases of for or against, attraction or aversion, liking and disliking. And this is important for revealing the three characteristics of existence. So you have to be able to look at your experiences from a place of unbiased, detached awareness. So this is why we practice mindfulness. So if you're patient and put effort into, say, developing mindfulness of breathing regularly, then you have a source of detached awareness there that you can keep coming back to and improving over time. Because generally, if you practice something regularly, you'll get a bit better at it. It may take time, effort, and practice, and that can be very frustrating. But it's bringing you the right qualities to be able to witness and observe the way things are. So as you develop more mindfulness and the mind becomes more centered, we experience more equanimity and we can accept the truth of the way things are more easily because the mind is in the middle rather than swinging according to its biases. Because a lot of change and these three characteristics, the change, the suffering and the lack of self in experiences are often hard to accept at first. We don't like it. We don't like to have to relinquish a wrong view that we've cherished and held on to before. We believe our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions so much that when we get a little bit of insight that says, actually, this is not really you, this is just a state of mind that's been conditioned by certain experiences, and actually it's not you, it's not permanent, it's not stable, it's not a self. Sometimes we don't like that. So meditators often have a reaction to seeing not self as they're meditating. They say they get to a point where they sort of hit a brick wall in their meditation and they don't want to relinquish attachment to certain things, certain ways of thinking, certain emotions that just quite like going to, pleasures, or even sometimes suffering, sadness. We actually cling to it out of habit. And when you're confronted with a reality that's deeper than you've seen before, that says actually what you were clinging to is not self, it's something that is temporary, they don't like it. People don't like it. And we have this feeling like if we let go or relinquish our attachment at that point, we'll have nothing left. So people say it's like standing on the edge of a cliff and then jumping off. And jumping off a cliff without a parachute, without a wingsuit or any kind of equipment, that's frightening because you think you're going to fall and die. And in a way, it is a kind of death, isn't it? The letting go of attachment, the seeing of the impermanent and selfless nature of body and mind is a kind of death. But actually it's the death of delusion, it's the death of attachment, the death of suffering. It's a good kind of death. But before we can really experience the letting go of self, we often recoil, we step back, because we're so used to attaching that to not attach is worrying. I have nothing left. People say this all the time. Like I was talking to someone today, and they said, "Well, if we let go of all our desires, there'll be nothing left. And what's the point?" Well, the point is you'll actually be free, and you'll be very peaceful if you let go of desire. But as an idea, it just doesn't sound right, does it? It sounds like we're going to have nothing left. If I let go of desire, I won't work, I won't earn money, I won't have any pleasure, there won't be any me left. And we all want to be somebody. We identify with this sense of who we are. And as I said, even sometimes We like to identify with the self that is feeling hurt. Sometimes we do get hurt and we have difficult traumatic experiences, but we identify with that. We become identified with that suffering to the point where we don't even want to let that go because it's become who we are. If we let that go, then we'll be a different person or something different than we've been attaching to. Maybe we're not ready for that. So sometimes we have to be quite courageous in the practice, be willing to really look and investigate and accept the conclusion that we're finding. If we're seeing that all these things we attach to as self are actually not what we thought they were, we have to accept that. We have to be brave enough to say, I am not my feelings. Feelings are conditioned things. You have a pleasant experience which gives rise to a pleasant feeling. Well, the sense of self forms saying, I like that, I want more of that. But that's a conditioned thing and there's no self there really, it's just an experience. Seeing something delightful, beautiful, gives rise to pleasure, and then we grasp at that. I like seeing this, I want this. But that I is not real. It's a condition. And you have eyes and you have a pleasant sight to be seen, so consciousness arises and then a pleasant feeling arises and the mind wants it and the sense of self arises at that point, and then we want more of it and we seek out more of it, and that becomes who we are with relation to that particular sight. And the same with sounds and tastes and smells and ideas and so on. But actually, when we establish mindfulness and reflect on the impermanent nature of these things and the conditioned, selfless nature of this experience or this process, the detached mind sees it's just a set of causes and conditions arising and passing away. And the mind is actually peaceful, just knowing there is seeing, and one can still be aware of beauty, but not attaching to it and not creating a self out of it. But we don't like that, to be able to see that there is no self in beauty or ugliness, things that bring us pleasure, things that bring us pain. We don't like to let go of the sense of self because we've invested in it for so long. But this is the path. This is the way the Buddha taught us, the way out of suffering. And the only way we can really understand it is developing mindfulness and investigating the truth. And this is why we have to keep coming back to meditation. Of course, Buddhism teaches on many levels, teaches on the level of basic generosity and compassion, which is important as well, and we can learn a lot in that as well, and that can also teach us about impermanence and not self. Because when you practice generosity, maybe it means giving away some of your time, your things, your money, your knowledge. And when you give something away, you see its temporary nature perhaps, and you see you're giving away something, you're losing ownership of that thing, so you're seeing the not self of it as well. So you can learn in those experiences as well, and they're important. But generosity alone is not enough to really see the impermanent and selfless nature of body and mind. It's a good way into it, it's a good start. And the practice of virtuous behavior, not harming others, restraining and letting go of thoughts to kill or steal, sexual misconduct, lying. Those intentions, restraining them also is giving you some insight into the impermanent nature of the mind, because if you have an intention to kill arise and you don't follow it through, you restrain it, then you're seeing the impermanence of that intention because you don't act on it. You're not feeding it, you're not building it up. So it starts to fade from your mind. If you do act on it, well, you're reinforcing it. It's very hard to stop, isn't it, once you've gone in one direction. That's why the Buddha encouraged us to keep the first precept very strictly, very carefully, because one thing leads to another. So if you give in to the intention, say, to kill an ant or a fly once, then you're reinforcing that intention. It will come up again, even though it's impermanent and not self. It will re-emerge in your stream of consciousness, and the tendency will be to follow it again, won't it? And again, and again. And one thing leads to another. So you start with flies, and then you move on to mice and frogs and birds and cats and dogs, and then you end up in wars, killing people, maybe. So the Buddha encourages us to be scrupulous, and you can see impermanence and not self in the practice of sila as well, and virtue, as well as when we're meditating. But we need all together. We need the practice of generosity, sila, and then bhavana, or meditation, all together to really train this mind. But this is what we call the path. You're training the mind, purifying the mind of delusion. So sometimes you can just, as you're going about your business, remind yourself, is this, how permanent is this thing I'm doing, this thought I'm thinking, these words I'm saying, this experience I'm having with this body, with this mind, how permanent is it? Question your experience, question every thought and view you hold. How often does it change? Because we're not particularly mindful, we miss change all the time, so then we don't recognize it as the way things are. Whereas we notice things that bring a sense of continuity and solidity. So the sense of self tends to be this sense of solidity. The body is, we see it as something solid, we just take it for granted. We don't see it as the component parts, say the 4 elements, the 32 parts, unless we start practicing analyzing it into its component parts. We just take it as a solid self, my body. And our mind is the same. Whatever we think is, I am this thought, I am this feeling, this memory. And there's even a certain solidity and continuity of mind that brings up the delusion of self, isn't it? So we have to keep reminding ourselves, contemplating this, breaking it down, checking ourselves, asking ourselves, what's going on here? Is this really me, a self? Where do my thoughts come from? Take the time just to stop and ask, where, the thought you had just now, where did it come from? What prompted it? Maybe it was prompted by the previous thought, and then the previous thought, and then the previous thought. And of course we receive different stimulus through our senses all the time, which bring up reactions, pleasure and displeasure, and the thinking that's associated with it. We receive information, we study, we learn. Some of it is quite useful and wise and helpful. Some of it is foolish, some of it is harmful. But where is it coming from? Stimulated, isn't it, by causes and conditions. So you listen to this talk and it may make sense to you, or it may be something, you may disagree with it, but it will stimulate your own opinions and thoughts. You read a book, you talk to someone, you have different experiences. This stimulates how you think, and then how you view the world, how you view yourself, how you view other people, based on what you like, what you dislike. Our views and opinions tend to be formed over time based on our experience. So as you go through life, you form views based on what you like. So what you like, what agrees with you, you tend to say, well, this is good for me. And so we develop biases around what we like, what gives us pleasure, what seems to make sense to us, makes us feel good. And then what we don't like, we form views and opinions based on that as well, don't we? So if you like your job at the moment, which is good, and I hope that your job is good and You find pleasure in it, and it provides you with a income. Maybe you can serve other people and help other people at the same time, all the better. But then if you lose your job because the economy changes, then that job that you found was good for you and you liked and you wanted to do, then suddenly you can't do it. So your view that this job is good for you and your identification with it as you and who you are, this is me, I do this job, suddenly that's changed, isn't it? Maybe it all collapses overnight. You're made redundant. The only job you're not being made redundant from is being a monk or a nun. There's always a need for them. But any other job, very unreliable, isn't it? It can be affected by the economy, by COVID, by wars in distant places, and so on. Things change all the time. And what you viewed as right and good for you and what you want suddenly is challenged, and maybe everything's turned upside down. Maybe it's not because of anything to do with the economics or anything, maybe it's just your health. One day you're healthy, the next day you're not. Life is full of change, and it's at those times when change comes that your views and opinions are challenged, and they often that's the time where they become apparent to you. Often we're very complacent in life, aren't we? We don't realize how we attach to things. Often change is the thing that points out where we were attached, where we were clinging. If you're contemplating change all along, then you're quite ready for it. Even the unpleasant changes, you're ready. If you've been seeing change taking place, well, you know that some changes are for the better, some are for the worse, some are good, some are bad. And that's just nature, that's just the way things are. So the Buddha called this the path of practice, developing wisdom or insight into the changing nature of physical, mental phenomena, and starting with your own body and mind, because that's where you can really know and see things changing. Every moment of every day, your thoughts are changing, memories are changing, sense consciousness moving around, seeing, tasting, hearing, thinking. This is what we call Vipassana Meditation, developing clear insight into the true nature of phenomena by observing closely, watching. And to do that, we need to be still, so we keep developing the mindfulness and observing things. Really, this is the most compassionate practice you can do for yourself and for others, because you're bringing your mind in line with the truth. It will help you to reduce your own suffering. One who sees the Dhamma is not deluded by the world. They understand the nature of this world is subject to change. What's subject to change is imperfect, unsatisfactory, it's suffering. It can't last. It's difficult to endure, isn't it? Change is difficult to endure. We want to have pleasant states of mind all the time, feel good, feel happy, but when things change, it's hard to bear with that change. If the change is an extreme one, then it's really hard to bear, isn't it? When you move from good health to bad health, it puts pressure on us. When we move from being employed meaningfully, gainfully, and then we lose our job, say, it's hard to bear with. When people, one moment they're treating us well and friendly, and then suddenly they change and become our enemy, or saying or doing things that harm us, it's hard to bear with. The nature of change is difficult to bear with, so it's dukkha, it's suffering. But there's nobody in the world who is not subject to change. The important thing is not fighting every change. I mean, of course, we do influence change. We are able to do that on a certain level, but more importantly is recognizing change as the way of the world, the way things are. Gain and loss, praise and blame, status, loss of status, pleasure and pain. The worldly winds are constantly changing around us. And the place of peace and the place of clarity is establishing mindfulness and reflecting on this, seeing this is just the way things are. And we're actually very fortunate, aren't we, living in the world and having discovered the Buddhist teachings, having received the wisdom of the Buddha and listening to talks, practicing. And we've got a head start on many other people. Every day we can turn to these teachings, we chant, we listen to the Dhamma, we read books, and then we meditate and contemplate for ourselves. We've already been given good advice, good guidelines, how to do it, what to do. So that's our great good fortune that we've encountered the Buddhist teachings. So we do have some strength of mind from that and some stability and some way to deal with the various problems that come up in our lives. So when you're encountering change or encountering the selfless nature, the uncontrollable nature of phenomena, even though it can be overwhelming, at least you have something to fall back on. I was talking about this with someone the other day about how, say in Thailand, every country will have its natural disasters and wars and problems from time to time. So there was that tsunami in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, 10 years ago, the Boxing Day tsunami. And a lot of the foreign TV crews sent their TV crews into Thailand and down to Phuket, where that region was hit worse by the tsunami. And they were under instructions to find traumatized people, because that makes good TV. We're kind of perverse in a way, human beings. We like to see people suffering. It's dramatic, it makes for good TV. So they were told to go and find people who are suffering and make stories out of them for the evening news. So I knew someone who was translating for one of the TV crews from Thai into English, and they were just given this direct instruction: go and find traumatized people. And they kept interviewing local Thai Buddhists who were coping with the tsunami, people who had lost their homes, lost their livelihoods, some of them lost their loved ones, some of them were injured, some of them were suffering in one way or another, physical suffering and all kinds of problems encountering. But they kept interviewing these people and finding that they were very well adjusted to it. And they would say, yes, life is impermanent, we accept that. Tsunamis happen, volcanic eruptions happen, earthquakes happen, tsunamis happen. When tsunamis come, things get damaged, people die. It's very sad, but these things happen. It's the way it is. And they kept answering in this kind of very down-to-earth, practical way, not to diminish the suffering of all the people involved, but they were very well adjusted to it from their Buddhist background, to say, yeah, things are impermanent. The world is an impermanent place. This is just reminding us of it, and we're just going to have to get on with life. So the director in New York or wherever the TV companies were based was getting very angry because he couldn't find traumatized people to put, his journalists on the ground were not finding enough traumatized people to make news items for the evening news based on the tsunami story. So the director was getting more angry than the people on the ground, which is kind of ironic. You could see the kind of the way these very simple teachings that everything is impermanent, things go according to causes and conditions. It kind of gently kind of absorbs into people's consciousness and the way they look at the world, they look at life based on the Buddhist teachings. And it can work in this way. If you keep observing and contemplating impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and the selfless nature of phenomena and the conditioned nature of life, it makes you wiser. It gives you the right kind of qualities to adjust when you do face unexpected change, even traumatic change. And nobody in the world wants to face trauma and disaster and problems, big or small, but they happen. And over again, you see how people who have heard and practiced the Buddhist teachings adjust to them and cope with them because of these teachings. Gives them a perspective, a right view, we say right view or wise perspective on things. It brings them a sense of balance, brings them a sense of calm in the midst of the storm, gives them a sense of understanding. When you do face difficulty and trauma, one of the things is people always say, why? Why has this happened? I don't deserve this, this shouldn't have happened, why has it happened? This is the voice of delusion. It's an understandable voice, of course. When people are suffering, they'll express their suffering in different ways. But it's really coming from a misunderstanding of truth. Somebody who's practiced with the Buddhist teachings maybe has a bit of advantage here, and they go, well, this thing has happened, but they can see, it's causes and conditions that have led up to it. And this world is an impermanent place, and these things do happen. Our health can change at any moment. Even death can come at any moment. Our life situation can dramatically change at any moment. A country can turn from peace to war. The weather can change from dry to wet to flooding. The economy can go up, the economy can go down. When things get better, we don't worry so much about change, do we? When it's changed for the better, we accept it very easily. When we get more money and work is going well and people treat us well, it's fine. When we recover from our illness, it's fine. When all the problems are settled and improvement comes, then we're fine. So change for the better tends to be very easy to accept because it's what we like, what we want, what our mind is seeking. But when it's changed for the worse, we can't accept it. But it's changed nonetheless. The nature of change can go in either direction, good or bad. But the bad one, the one that doesn't fit with our worldview, then that's the one that stirs us up and makes us really suffer. And that's where we need to apply the teachings. Say, change is like this, and change isn't always for the good. It can be for the bad. Change isn't always controllable. We can't stop every change. Of course, we do wish each other well, we bless each other, we have compassion, kindness for each other. No one wishes other people to have disaster and trauma and difficulty in their life. But at the same time, these things happen in one way or another. So we might as well prepare ourselves for the ups and downs and the unexpected events of life. Contemplate impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self every day. Just when you observe your own mind and you see the different moods that flow through your mind. So one moment happy, one moment sad, one moment bored, one moment interested. The different mental states coming and going. Stop, reflect on that and say, this is the way of the world, isn't it? It's a world full of change. There's nothing unusual about change. This is the way out of suffering. When you can see the truth, then your mind understands this is the way things are. So I'll leave you with these thoughts for your reflection tonight.
ท่านธรรมยา